Hi, I'm Mark Root and welcome back to Nomad Boatbuilding. Now we're working on the 2.4 meter project, and in the last video we started building our mold. Now we've got a little more work to do on that, but in order for the next few sequence of events to make sense, we need to take a little step back and look at the general construction of this boat. Now we've got a hull and we've got a keel, and if I were to build this all in one piece, the hull and the keel added together come up to somewhere around my chest height, and that is going to be very difficult to work on. Both especially getting down inside of the hull, but also working up here on the deck level. So in order to solve that, I'm going to build the hull and the keel separately. I'll get the hull pretty close to finished, and then we'll be dropping the keel down through the slot in the hull, and we'll bond it in place there. Now, the keel we're going to be building is a hollow box keel. So it's basically like a hollow box into which we're going to put lead pigs, and that is part of the rules of this particular sailing class, is that it has to have that sort of keel construction. So that will be the subject of today's video, is building that keel. But before we get onto that, let's just take a look at the general backbone construction so that what I'm doing with the keel makes a little bit more sense.
The backbone of our boat consists of several components. Starting at the bow, we have a stem, which will be made out of sapele mahogany. Connected to that will be our keelson, which will be Sitka spruce, and that will run from the stem to the stern post. Our stern post is in fact going to be a small bulkhead made out of red cedar, and connecting that to the stern of the boat is what's called the horn timber. We'll be making that out of Sitka spruce as well. Now this boat doesn't exactly have a transom, but it'll have a small bit of blocking that the deck connects to, and will be buried by the deck and the planking. Now you'll notice a small portion that's missing, and I'm going to call that the skeg. We're not going to build that as part of the hull to start with. We're going to make that as a separate component out of styrofoam and fiberglass. Due to the shape of the hull, this is really the only practical way to deal with this particular part. Next we need to look at our keel. Now it's going to be a hollow box, and we need to figure out a way to mount it into the hull. I decided to install sort of a plywood bearing plate that runs from the forward end of the keel all the way aft along a level line. Between that and the planking, we need some sort of filler. We'll make that out of red cedar. Combined into one, I refer to this component as the deadwood. Now we need a hole in that deadwood and keelson that matches the cross section of our keel box. And then when we're finally done with the hull and the deck, we can drop that keel down right through that hole and bond it in place. And that is our finished backbone assembly.
So what I'm doing here is I'm basically building our hollow ballast keel, strip building it out of ash. Ash partially because it's a good dense wood, it's resilient. Once it's encapsulated in fiberglass and epoxy, it's going to be extremely strong. And I had a whole bunch of it on hand that was scrapped from another project, and so it was really kind of a perfect choice. Just using a little bit of Titebond 3 to tack these together. It's really going to be relying on epoxy to hold it all together ultimately, but just to sort of get the ball rolling, I used the Titebond. Probably going to have a bit of a miserable time wrestling these brads out of here later on, but and as I progress, I'm able to make use of wider stock as I go, just to speed things up here. Okay, got
these all laid up, and I'm just going to give them a once over with a batch of just very slightly thickened epoxy. And all I'm really trying to do is just kind of get it into all the cracks and stuff, just to really lock this form up before I fair it out. Because the last thing I want to do is start fairing and have these individual streaks bouncing around on me. Down here at the trailing edge, I actually gave it a strip of G10, which is an epoxied fiberglass panel. Same thing they use for circuit boards. And you can buy that stuff by the sheet. It's perfect for this kind of thing where you need a structural component and you don't want it to be wood. Beautiful. Looks great. I'll be hitting that with the belt sander, I think, to fair this out, because it's not the kind of thing you want to fair out by hand, especially being ash. But I think it should fair out nicely. Okay, so we've got our keel basically stripped up here. So these are very simple little plywood bulkheads. There's 4 of them. They're going to come out. And we have used hot glue to glue them right down to the tabletop, and then I've used packing tape around the perimeter, anywhere that glue could drip, especially like along here. We're going to be glassing this here, and I want a nice crisp transition here where the glass terminates. And we're going to be putting a flange on one end using G10, and here's some of the same stuff. This is G10 right here. So, and this is the trailing edge of the keel. So I wanted to use this there because it's such a fine, damage-prone area that having just solid fiberglass in there basically means that any dings and stuff are not going to allow water to get into the wooden substructure. Okay, now I'm just going to figure out what tool I'm going to use for doing this fairing job. Obviously a belt sander will probably do a bunch of the work. It gets into a very slight hollow in here, and I might just get out my big disc sander. Okay, that fairing went pretty good with the disc sander. I followed it up with my little belt sander here just to help fair things out and kind of dial in these sort of hard turns near the leading edge where I can't get that disc sander in there. I've gone over it a bit with my longboard just to help sort of feather it out a little bit, but still I can feel that it's not 100%. Ash is not an easy thing to fair out. It's just the grain is so irregular in terms of the hardness between the late and early growth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move ahead, and after I'm planning to put 2 layers of glass on this anyway. So I think I'll put a first layer of glass on, and then I'll fair that out with some fillers. And then once that's faired out, then I will put a second layer of glass on. I got my top surface here and my bottom surface. One of them's just getting capped, and then the other one's getting a flange on there. I still need to make those flanges and caps, but I'm just going to prepare those edges first so that they're ready to receive that stuff. Okay, so this material I've got here is called G10. It's a composite
panel material. It's fiberglass and with epoxy resin. I got it from McMaster Carr. So I'm making basically a cap for the bottom and then a flange. This stuff really stinks badly though when you cut it, I tell you. However, it is a really great material to have on hand for wooden boat building, because when you do need to create some sort of structural backing for fasteners, for instance, it's really hard to beat this stuff. I mean, because it's epoxy based, it's already by definition going to work well for us, just because we're using epoxy for all of our other fastening methods, so there's no bonding issues. And this stuff is also electrically neutral too, so if you need to isolate fastenings, it's great material for that. The price tag isn't too bad on it either. I can't remember what it was exactly. This is probably about $50 for this 2x3 foot sheet. Whenever you're fastening anything with tape, when you're epoxying, you got to remember to prepare your tape, because you cannot peel this stuff off with rubber gloves on to save your life. And even ideally, you put a little fold over on one end like I've done, so you got something to grab onto that will not stick to the glove, because the tape will stick to the glove like crazy if you give it half a chance. So I'm just putting some thickened epoxy on this joint here. And I know this looks like a tiny little contact surface area, and it is. However, we will be putting a very generous fillet in on the other side of this flange. And of course it's going to get glassed over inside and out, so there should be plenty of structure there. And then it's not even just hanging off the flange. I mean, the flange is sort of belt and suspenders. It's actually going to get dropped into a fairly deep slot in the boat. So there's going to be a ton of material around this thing just to keep it from falling off. Okay, so I've got some little registration marks on here to keep get the flange lined up. There we go. I'm using this backing board. And adding these big right angle brackets here to make sure that this flange is nice 90 degrees to the center line. I'm a little shy on these little right angle brackets. I should really have more. They're so useful around the shop. However, it was making with these things that caused me to break my finger last year. Chopped them on the chop saw. One of them jumped, flipped over, jammed on the blade, took my finger, slammed it into the fence. It took a good solid 6 months before that finally healed up to where I could use it properly again. Don't recommend it. So I have got a filler here, which is one recommended by Russell Brown, who's a boat builder in this
filler recipe is 2 parts colloidal silica, 2 parts low density filler, and then 1 part high density filler. So this seems to be a mix that he came up with that he's confident in using, and if he's confident, I'm confident. So the colloidal silica prevents sagging. The high density filler obviously gives it density and strength, and then the low density filler gives it some sandability, and a low density filler flows out really nicely too. So I used this on my dory project, and I was really impressed with how nicely it sanded out and fared out. Perfect. So it's got just enough consistency that it can stand up, but it's not sort of too peanut buttery. And here we go. You got to come right to the end there. And the trick is getting it tooled out in one shot, which, come on, without running short, which is always hard to do. And ideally you want to sort of finish off your tooling sort of, well, if you can get it all the way from one end to the other in one shot, great, but I rarely find myself being able to pull that off. Come on, all the way, all the way, all the way. Oh, one little hole. Okay. You know, laying down that bead was only half the challenge. Now you got to try and do the cleanup without disturbing it, and that's where you want a little stick or a cutting knife with a nice sharp edge on it. Sometimes it helps to have one that's got like a skewed edge. Sometimes a skewed edge can help you get in a little bit tighter. And of course, you do not want to touch your bead. If you got a little bit of a smear on that from your stick, just leave it alone. It'll sand out easily enough. There we go. That's as good as I can make it without screwing it up. I want a little past my optimum green state, but it's still doable to trim all this extra fiberglass back. Fantastic. Alright, my job now is to knock out these guys. And then I got a whole bunch of little nails I'm going to have to pluck out of there. Ferret out, fill it, and glass it. Now, let's hope I can get my little molds to separate from the rest.
pliers and try and pluck out all these pins. That worked great. Okay, I've got my keel sections ready to go together. Well, not quite ready. I need to do a little bit of work on these things, just roughing up the gluing surfaces, which at the moment are just going to be the tail end of the fin here, this epoxy, this G10 bottom here, and then this little edge right along here. So it's a fairly small gluing surface. I think I'm going to try and work a nice generous fillet into here on the inside. So we'll put these together in a minute and have a look at that. Out here, this just needs to get clamped. That's fine. And I think I might need to do something to try and align these two guys. So I'll probably just set a bolt with washers into the joint here just to align these guys a little bit, and I can pull that out later on. So let's just throw these together and have a quick look. So it's going to take a little bit of juggling to get it all sort of lined up properly, I think. But it went together pretty good before my other dry run. Here's the bottom here. That looks great. Oh, those actually line really nicely. But we're a little out of whack here at the flange, so I think I'm kind of obligated to align at the flange. And then the bottom needs a little bit of a tweak. Yeah, so this guy runs out about 1/8 of an inch over the length of this. So let's see. Maybe what we'll do is try putting a more substantial clamp at the flange. Okay, that looks good. How one gets it together is always the question. Okay, that looks pretty good. So you can see down here, it's not quite on the money. It comes pretty close, but not quite there. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that. I'll try my bolt idea. I'll see if I can kind of squeeze that into alignment. Fingers crossed. Looks like down here I probably won't be able to pull that off. I'm not too concerned about that because I got a whole other plate that's going to go on the bottom and get bonded on there, so I can even fill a gap, no problem. So it's not a huge deal. You know, it'd be nice if it were right on the money, but all things considered, it's pretty good. I'll take a look inside. I like that. Oh, that closes that up nicely. That looks really good. Just put a little squeeze on here and we'll see if that helps. Yep, put a little squeeze on there and that helps. So I'm not sure if I'll try and squeeze that together or not. I don't really have to. I can just let epoxy fill.
but I might throw some tape on there. So that's looking pretty good. Okay, the big guess, of course, is always how much epoxy to mix up. I've got 3 shots here. I'm not sure if that's going to be enough. And I'm just mixing it with colloidal silica to thicken it. And I want a fairly stiff mix for this. Something that's not quite peanut butter, but not far from it. So stiffen up to hold peaks, but we want to be able to get a nice smooth fillet joint as well. I won't be able to really sand up in here, so I'm not going to worry about that. I could, but I'm going to probably try and avoid it. Okay, I'm just going to start by laying in a little bead of epoxy on these edges here. I'm going a little heavy on this because I want to make sure that I can get a fillet inside. The trick with the fillet though is I don't want too much because it's going to be really hard to clean up any excess. So it's kind of a delicate balance. It's really hard for me to say exactly how much to put in. But take a guess and hope for the best. Okay, and we're just going to put a little bead along the bottom edge here to try and key it together. Don't want too much inside because again it'll be hard to clean up. Outside is easy peasy. And we got our little notch where our bolt's going to go, so we'll just hold back from that. And then here, I don't want to have too much extra because this is sort of a really tight little hole, and it's going to be pretty hard to get in there to clean anything out. So just do our best to sort of put a generous tab in here to hold it together. And I think I'll just do a light smear on the opposing side just to make sure that we get full contact. Well, I know I'm going to get full contact, but it's always good practice, good policy to make sure everything is 100% tagged together. Now the big trick is going to be getting this together without making a total mess out of it until I get it all clamped up into place. Now if this bottom joint seems rather inadequate, don't forget we're getting a whole other layer of G10 applied to the outside of it, so it will be very well taken care of when we're done. And also that means I'm going to have a good substantial 1/4 inch of fiberglass on the bottom of the whole thing, so that's pretty good. Okay, I think that ought to do it. Okay, so I got some little pieces of plastic blocking here for my clamp pads. So we'll start with just popping those on, and then we're going to put a nice substantial C-clamp on here. I think I probably want to make sure it's out of my way for my tooling of that joint. Just do the same on the other side.
I think clamping is one of the dark arts of boat building. Trying to get clamps to hang on to an organic shape that's covered in sticky goo can be really, really challenging, and this project is no exception. I had to wrestle quite a few clamps on here to try and get that bottom aligned and get it closed up. It took a few false tries, but we finally got it in the end. And the last task for closing this up is running a nice little fillet down the inside of this joint.
Just getting ready to fiberglass the outside of this again, and I'm going to do it in 2 pieces, and each layer is going to overlap this joint so that we get basically 2 layers of fiberglass on the outside. Giving this a scrub down with a Scotch-Brite pad and some warm water, and that's to get rid of a mean blush. Now I'm using West Systems 207 resin.
which is supposed to be blush free, which is fine, I believe that, but it doesn't hurt to do this anyway. It's been a few days since I've glassed the outside of this. I gave it a little scuff down with some 80 grit sandpaper, and if nothing else, this is just going to make sure that we end up with a nice dust-free finish to work on, and it takes so little time, so you might as well do it. I mean, blush, of course, is problematic because it's like a waxy substance, and if you don't take it off before finishing, your finish may not cure, and if you don't take it off before bonding two pieces of material together with epoxy, that bond may not take. So that's all it really takes is a good rub down, and then we'll just this rag and give it a good wipe. I'll go empty my pot of water here, get some fully clean water, and give it one more wipe down before we're done.
Well, I've added another layer of fiberglass to both sides of the box keel, and the last job is to add this bottom plate. Now the purpose of the bottom plate is to really tie these two sides together. But also, these boats don't live in the water. They live on the dock on a dolly, and the full weight of the boat and the ballast rides on the bottom of this keel. We want to make sure it's really good and substantial. All that's left to do on this is to refine the shape of this bottom plate, clean it up on the belt sander, and give it a good scrub down before gluing it in place. With the keel box pretty much complete, I can turn my attention to the deadwood assembly. I'm going to start with the plywood bearing plate. We're making this out of a piece of 1/2 inch thick marine plywood, and I used my lofting to figure out exactly what the shape of it would be. It describes a flat level plane running from the fore end of the keel aft and basically touches the planking on all of its sides. Likewise, the lofting has allowed us to figure out the shape of the cedar blocking that's going to fill in the space between that plywood and the face of the planking.
Give this little deadwood test drive. So just slide on like so. That looks good. Looks really good. So I got sort of a 1/8 to 3/16 inch gap all the way around the edge here, which would be big enough to be able to tool epoxy in there easily. Okay, and then this is the rest of the dead wood that goes around here. Likewise, of course, all of this gets chopped away to where the planking fares into it. So that feels really good. I'm quite pleased with that fit.
The last step in our keel and deadwood assembly is to cut a rabbet around the opening. And after the hull is complete, we can just drop the keel through, bond it in place. We're going to get a nice flush finish, just like this.
Okay, well here's our finished keel box. Now I've added a couple coats of thickened epoxy to fair it out and a few more coats of epoxy over top of that to finish it. So it just needs paint right now. But this is ready to go, ready to get dropped into our hull when we get it finished. I'm really pleased with how it turned out. It feels really solid. This flange is just rock solid up here, so that's going to provide great support for the weight that's going to go into here. And this is going to carry about 450 pounds, so it's not an insignificant amount of weight, but I think it's going to work out pretty good. Now, if you didn't notice it before, we put a generous fillet in underneath this flange, and down here where the bottom meets the sides, there's a generous fillet on the inside. And then of course we added a full extra layer of fiberglass G10 onto the outside of it. And that's just really bonding it all together very nicely, so it's got a good solid foot. And we'll put a drain hole in the bottom because any water that gets into the boat drains down into this keel. We also run a hose for the bilge pumps down into the keel here so that we can pick up any water out of it that we want to. All in all, this came out really well. My plan worked out, getting away with a very simple mold construction, and it is stiff. It's very, very stiff, so I'm quite pleased with that. I think I made the right choices on this one. That's all for today, folks. On the next video, we're going to finish that mold and we're going to get going on the backbone. I want to thank all of my followers over on Patreon who make these videos possible, and if you would like to help us with these videos, just join us over on Patreon. There'll be links in the description or one of those little doodaddies up here. So I'll see you later. Ciao for now, folks.